Keanu Reeves, one of the world's most beloved actors renowned for his humility and generosity, has always believed that success truly matters when it's shared. Yet, behind the scenes, few know that he invested part of his fortune to build a hospital, a sanctuary designed to treat every individual with dignity, regardless of their financial means. One day, stirred by unsettling reports and a persistent feeling of unease, he decides to visit his own hospital incognito. Disguised as an ordinary patient, he walks through the reception doors expecting to witness empathy and professionalism. Instead, he is met with a shocking reality. The head of the emergency ward is an arrogant doctor who wields his power to treat patients with contempt, humiliating those in dire need and arbitrarily deciding who deserves care. What this doctor remains unaware of is that among the mistreated is none other than the true owner of the hospital. Keanu silently observes the unfolding abuse, his indignation held in check. But for how long will he remain silent? How will this story end? Stay with us until the very end to find out. And before we continue, please let us know where you're watching this video from. We love hearing from you and always read the comments. Keanu Reeves sat alone in his spacious, quiet office, his eyes fixed on the sprawling cityscape visible through the enormous glass window that dominated one wall. The city below shimmered with innumerable lights, each a tiny beacon amid the urban darkness, while cars whizzed along busy streets in a never-ending rush. Amid the hum of distant traffic and the soft murmur of nocturnal life, Keanu's thoughts wandered back to a time when he, too, had been overlooked and dismissed. Though he had risen to a stature of fame, wealth, and respect, he never forgot the bitter sting of feeling like a nobody. It was precisely that memory, an echo of a past filled with struggle, that had driven him years ago to invest in a hospital. But this was no ordinary charitable venture. Instead, Keanu envisioned a model institution, one where every human being, regardless of social or financial standing, would be treated with unwavering dignity and compassion. Yet, despite all outward signs of success and glowing official reports, something was grievously wrong at the hospital. Anonymous complaints had begun trickling in, murmurs of neglect and cruelty that ran counter to the institution's mission. Keanu, a man who had seen both the heights of celebrity and the depths of humiliation, could not abide the idea that any person should be made to suffer through indifference and mistreatment. Determined to get to the bottom of these disturbing allegations, he resolved to conduct an incognito investigation. He would enter the hospital himself, disguised as a regular patient, and witness firsthand whether the lofty ideals he had instilled were being honored. That very evening, as dusk melted into night, Keanu mounted his old black motorcycle, a machine that, though modest by comparison to his glamorous lifestyle, carried an air of nostalgic practicality. He donned a worn-out jacket and faded jeans, intentionally choosing the plainest attire to conceal his true identity. With his features softened by the casual garb, he rode through the city's neon-lit streets, blending into the crowd, until he reached the imposing glass doors of his own hospital. As he stepped inside, the transformation was complete. The celebrated actor was now just another face in a long line of patients. At the reception desk, a tired-looking woman was absorbed in her computer screen, her eyes locked on the endless stream of data and appointments. Keanu approached quietly and, after a brief moment of silence, said, "Good evening, I'd like to schedule a consultation." The receptionist's gaze, weary and impatient, flicked briefly over his plain clothes, a stark contrast to the usual air of entitlement some patients might exude. "Name?" she asked curtly. "Keanu," he replied, his voice neutral and unassuming. Without questioning further, she entered insurance into the system. When he offered, "I'd rather pay in cash," her impatience deepened. She sighed, rolled her eyes, and handed him a small slip of paper with his waiting number. "Wait your turn, it's going to take a while," she added dismissively. Taking the slip of paper, Keanu moved to the waiting area, a long, quiet room lined with mismatched chairs that bore silent witness to countless stories of hope and despair. He chose a seat between two individuals whose conditions seemed as disparate as their ages. On his left sat an elderly man, whose pained expression and labored breathing spoke of a life weathered by hardship. To his right, a young mother cradled her feverish baby in her arms. The child's tiny chest rose and fell rapidly, a subtle yet desperate rhythm that betrayed his burning fever. As Keanu settled into his seat, his keen eyes began to absorb every detail of the unfolding scene. Near the front desk, the tension of the moment was palpable. The mother, desperation etched into every line of her face, rose from her seat and approached the receptionist once again. "Please, my baby is very sick. He needs a doctor now," she pleaded, her voice quivering with a mixture of fear and exhaustion. The receptionist, barely glancing up, responded with the same practiced indifference as before. "Ma'am, I told you already. You need to wait your turn." The woman's voice rose as she continued, "But he's getting worse." Yet, the receptionist only scowled and retorted, "If you're so worried, maybe you should take him to a public hospital. Here, we follow the rules." Keanu's eyes narrowed at this blatant injustice. As he observed the mother's despair, he also noticed an elderly man seated nearby. The older gentleman was clutching his chest, his breathing ragged and punctuated by weak, labored gasps. He attempted to call for help, his voice barely audible, but a young nurse passed him by, offering nothing more than a cursory glance and the dismissive remark, "Sir, I can't stop everything for every little pain. Just wait your turn." The elderly man's face contorted in pain as he slumped further, a silent testament to the callousness of the system. Across the room, a sharply dressed man in a tailored suit strode confidently past the reception desk. Unlike everyone else, he did not need a waiting number or endure the slow process of being attended to. Instead, the staff greeted him with respectful smiles, parting ways as if he were a VIP. "Dr. Javier is expecting you, sir. You can go right in," they said. Keanu watched the scene unfold with growing anger. Here, in this very hospital, built with his own hands, the rich and privileged received immediate, preferential treatment, while those most in need were forced to wait, neglected by a system that valued numbers and efficiency over human compassion. Unable to contain his discontent, Keanu stood and returned to the reception desk. "Excuse me," he said, gesturing discreetly toward the suffering mother and the elderly man still in distress. "Are you sure there isn't anything that can be done? They need urgent help." The receptionist's face twisted into a scowl of irritation. "I already told you, everyone has to wait their turn," she replied sharply. "If you're so worried, perhaps you should." But before she could finish her sentence, Keanu shook his head slightly, his dark eyes fixed in quiet determination. He returned to his seat, the incident confirming what he already suspected. In a situation where lives were at risk, rigid adherence to rules was not just impractical, it was inhumane. While the patients suffered in silence, Dr. Javier Fuentes continued his self-important stroll through the corridors. Tall and impeccably groomed, with perfectly styled hair and cold, sharp eyes. He wore his pristine white coat as though it were a badge of superiority. In one hand he cradled an expensive cup of coffee, and in the other, he seemed to wield the authority of a man who saw himself as above the concerns of ordinary mortals. To him, the patients were nothing more than numbers to be tallied, a collection of inconvenient obstacles in his daily routine. Suddenly, a piercing scream shattered the hum of activity in the waiting area. The feverish child's mother, her face a mask of terror and desperation, bolted from her seat and rushed toward Dr. Javier. Clutching her child tightly, she cried out, "Doctor, please! My baby is burning up. He needs help now." Dr. Javier paused mid-stride, his eyes lazily scanning the frantic woman from head to toe. His expression, already one of thinly veiled disgust, deepened into one of annoyance as he rolled his eyes, took a deliberate sip of his coffee, and replied in a tone dripping with condescension, "If he's sick, then wait, like everyone else. This hospital is not a daycare." His words, as cold and indifferent as the clinical surroundings, cut through the room like a knife. The mother, frozen in shock and disbelief, could only stand silently as the doctor added, "Listen carefully. If I stopped everything for every child with a minor fever, this hospital would go bankrupt." With her spirit visibly broken, the mother slowly returned to her seat, her eyes filled with unshed tears, while Keanu's blood boiled with indignation. On the opposite side of the waiting room, the elderly man who had been clutching his chest continued to suffer silently. Keanu leaned toward him and asked gently, "Sir, are you okay?" The man forced a tired smile, his voice weak as he replied, "I've been through worse. I just have to wait." Keanu's heart ached at the resignation in the man's tone, a stark reminder of the cruelty inflicted upon those who had no voice. Before long, another patient made his entrance into the reception area, a young man bearing a deep, bleeding cut on his hand. The wound was clearly severe, the blood staining a makeshift bandage that did little to staunch the flow. His expression was a mix of pain and urgency, and he pleaded softly, Please, I need help. The receptionist, as if accustomed to such emergencies, nodded nonchalantly and directed him toward Dr. Javier's office without so much as a glance of concern. Keanu leaned forward, intent on observing how the doctor would handle yet another case of neglect. Inside the consultation room, the young man was barely a few steps away from receiving medical attention when Dr. Javier's voice suddenly rang out in the corridor, laden with sarcasm and derision. "Are you serious? You came here for that." The words, harsh and dismissive, filled the space with a chilling sense of disregard. The young man hesitated, his voice trembling as he said, "Doctor, it's bleeding a lot, and it really hurts." Dr. Javier's response was a mocking laugh. "That's just a scratch, kid. Put some alcohol on it and go home." The humiliation in the young man's eyes was unmistakable as he slowly bowed his head and left the room, his need for proper care ignored. As he passed by, Keanu stepped forward and said quietly but firmly, "Let me see your hand." Startled, the young man looked up and asked, "Who are you?" Keanu offered a gentle, reassuring smile and replied, "I'm just someone who cares." Producing a clean handkerchief from his pocket, he assisted in pressing it gently against the wound, a small act of kindness in a system otherwise steeped in callous indifference. In another corner of the hospital, Dr. Javier continued to make his rounds, his expression a mixture of irritation and amusement as he watched the drama unfold. Oblivious to the growing unrest among the staff, he remained confident that his own actions, however brusque, were justified by the hospital's relentless focus on numbers and efficiency. But what he did not realize was that within this very establishment, a man, one of the very patients he had so disdainfully dismissed, was about to expose the deep-seated corruption that lay at the heart of the institution. Throughout the hospital, the corridors buzzed with an undercurrent of frustration and whispered complaints. Nurses scurried back and forth, their footsteps echoing off sterile walls, while the constant tapping of keyboards at the reception desk provided a monotonous soundtrack to the unfolding tragedy. Keanu sat in the waiting area, outwardly calm despite the fire igniting within him. He had witnessed too many instances of negligence and cruelty, too many lives reduced to mere statistics, and he knew that if this system continued unchecked, the very soul of his hospital would be lost. Dr. Javier, with his arrogant dismissals and indifferent manner, had become a symbol of everything that was wrong with the institution. But beyond him lay a much larger problem, a system that allowed such behavior to flourish unchecked, silencing dissent and prioritizing numbers over human dignity. Before leaving the waiting room, Keanu felt an urgency to collect further evidence, a more complete picture of the daily injustices suffered by patients and staff alike. Quietly, he rose from his seat and made his way toward a secluded area of the hospital where the lower-level employees took their breaks. This was a part of the building where the true heartbeat of the hospital resided, away from the polished facades and clinical efficiency. He found a slightly ajar door behind which he could hear hushed, frustrated voices. Peering inside, he saw a small group of nurses huddled together, their faces etched with fatigue and resignation. One nurse said quietly, "Dr. Javier humiliated another patient today." Another nurse added, "It's always the same. Who dares report him? Management protects him." A younger nurse, her eyes full of uncertainty and fear, murmured, "If anyone complains, he always finds a way to get back at them. They cut our hours, cancel our shifts, even give us bad performance reviews." As the conversation continued, Keanu listened intently, his heart tightening with each word. It wasn't just one arrogant doctor who was responsible. It was an entire system that enabled and rewarded such callous behavior. Deciding that this evidence was too important to ignore, Keanu stepped into the room. The sudden intrusion silenced the group. "I'm sorry for interrupting," he said calmly but firmly. "I couldn't help but overhear what you were saying. I want to understand what's really happening here." One nurse, after a moment of hesitation, mustered the courage to speak. "Sir, you heard everything. It goes far beyond Dr. Javier. Management cares only about the numbers. They don't see the suffering of the patients, as long as the statistics look good." Keanu's eyes narrowed with a mixture of sorrow and resolve. "And that must change," he declared. "Everyone here deserves to be treated with dignity, and I intend to make sure that happens." The nurses exchanged uncertain glances, but one by one, they began to confide their frustrations and fears. They spoke of a culture of silence, where even speaking out against abuse could result in severe retaliation. In that moment, Keanu realized that if he were to restore the true purpose of the hospital, he would need to dismantle the entire system that had allowed such corruption to take root. Returning to the waiting area, Keanu surveyed the scene once more. The elderly woman who had been waiting silently still clutched her worn purse as if it were a lifeline. The young man with the injured hand, humiliated and frightened, sat quietly while dabbing at his wound with a dirty cloth, and the mother, still rocking her feverish baby in her arms, looked resigned and utterly exhausted. Each face told a story of neglect, a story that Keanu was determined to change. Before departing, he approached one of the security guards stationed near the entrance. "I'd like to speak with the hospital administrator," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. The guard, initially puzzled, hesitated only for a moment before picking up the phone to make the necessary call. Within minutes, Keanu found himself escorted into a modestly furnished conference room where the hospital's chief administrator awaited him. A middle-aged man with graying hair, a stern expression, and an aura of bureaucratic authority. "State your business," the administrator demanded, his voice tinged with impatience. Keanu crossed to the table slowly, maintaining a calm, firm posture as he sat down and fixed the administrator with an unwavering gaze. "My name is Keanu Reeves," he began, his voice steady and controlled. An immediate silence fell over the room as the administrator's face paled in recognition. The guards exchanged uncertain glances. "And I am the owner of this hospital," Keanu continued, each word deliberate and heavy with meaning. For a long, tense moment, the room was enveloped in a heavy silence. Finally, the administrator managed to speak. "Mr. Reeves, if I had known you were here," he trailed off, clearly at a loss for words. Keanu interrupted him with a calm yet resolute tone. "I have seen the abuses here, the neglect of those who need care the most. I have witnessed how patients are humiliated and staff are intimidated into silence. Something is gravely wrong, and I intend to fix it immediately." The administrator's composure began to crumble. Adjusting his collar nervously, he tried to defend the system. "Mr. Reeves, we pride ourselves on efficiency. Dr. Javier, despite what you might think, is one of our most efficient doctors. He keeps the numbers high." Keanu's expression hardened. "Numbers mean nothing if they come at the expense of human lives. I have seen how you treat the vulnerable. Special treatment for some is the norm here, while others wait in agony." Before the administrator could muster a reply, a nurse, one of those who had confided in Keanu earlier, stepped forward. "It's true," she said softly, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Everyone here knows what Dr. Javier does, but no one dares report him. If anyone complains, they face retaliation." The administrator's face drained of color as he struggled to maintain his facade of control. Keanu leaned forward, his elbows resting on the table as he fixed the administrator with an intense, unwavering gaze. "If your hospital values high numbers above human dignity, then it has already failed. I will not allow a system that treats people as disposable to continue." With that declaration, he commanded the attention of everyone in the room. "Security, bring Dr. Javier here immediately." Within moments, the conference room door swung open, and Dr. Javier entered with his usual confident stride. His eyes, however, widened in shock when the administrator, in a trembling voice, announced, "This is the owner of the hospital." Dr. Javier's face went pale as he registered the gravity of the situation. "Let me get this straight," Keanu said, crossing his arms and looking directly at the man who had become the embodiment of cruelty in his hospital. "You treat patients like inconveniences. I have seen you dismiss a desperate mother and ignore a young man with a serious injury. Your actions are not only unprofessional, they are inhumane." Dr. Javier attempted to laugh it off, his tone forced and defensive. "I'm merely doing my job. I have seen dozens of patients every day. I know when someone's condition is serious and when it's nothing more than routine fatigue." Keanu's eyes narrowed. "If your job is to care for people, then why does everyone here fear you?" Dr. Javier's smirk faded, replaced by a look of growing apprehension. Keanu turned to the administrator with quiet authority. "Dr. Javier is fired, effective immediately." The announcement sent shockwaves through the room. A staff member stepped forward in protest, exclaiming, "You can't do this." But Keanu's voice was unwavering. "I can and I have." As security guards moved in to escort Dr. Javier out of the room, he offered a final, furious warning. "If I ever hear of you working at another hospital and treating patients this way, I will ensure you never practice medicine again." The enraged doctor was led away, his earlier arrogance replaced by bitter defeat. With Dr. Javier gone, Keanu addressed the remaining staff and the hospital administrator. "The time for change is now," he declared. "I intend to implement an anonymous reporting system for any abuse, and every employee will undergo mandatory empathy and patient care training. From this day forward, every patient, regardless of their financial status, will be treated with the dignity they deserve." A tearful nurse asked hesitantly, "Is this really possible?" Keanu smiled gently, nodding. "Yes, and we will do it together." The administrator, realizing that resistance was futile, finally nodded in reluctant agreement. In the days and weeks that followed, a noticeable transformation swept through the hospital. The once oppressive corridors began to feel lighter, as if the very air had been cleansed of neglect and cruelty. Patients who had been routinely ignored now received prompt and compassionate care. The mother with the feverish baby returned to the hospital and was given the urgent attention she deserved. The young man with the injured hand, once humiliated by dismissive treatment, was attended to properly and treated with genuine respect. Inspired by the sweeping changes, the hospital staff found themselves invigorated by a newfound sense of purpose. No longer shackled by fear, they began to take pride in their work, embracing the idea that every patient was a human being worthy of empathy. Several weeks later, Keanu returned to the hospital to observe the fruits of the transformation he had set in motion. As he strolled through the now brighter corridors, he took in the sight of smiling nurses, patients engaged in hopeful conversation, and an overall atmosphere of renewed care and compassion. Just as he was about to leave, a small child ran up to him. The 5-year-old, with bright, curious eyes, tugged at his hand and asked, "Are you Keanu Reeves, the owner of the hospital?" Keanu knelt down to the child's level, his heart softened by the innocence before him. "Yes, that's me," he replied with a warm smile. The boy grinned shyly and said, "Thank you for helping people. The doctors are nice now." Keanu gently ruffled the child's hair, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. In that quiet moment, standing amid a hospital reborn with hope and dignity, he knew that his vision had finally begun to materialize, a place where respect and compassion reigned, and where the cost of neglect had been paid in full. As the night deepened, the hospital continued its daily rhythm, but now with a profound difference. Every staff member, from the front desk clerks to the senior physicians, carried within them a shared commitment to care that transcended numbers and bureaucratic metrics. The anonymous reporting system, once a mere proposal, had been implemented with strict safeguards to protect whistleblowers, ensuring that any instance of abuse could be addressed swiftly and justly. The empathy training sessions became a regular part of every employee's schedule, with seminars and workshops that not only taught better patient care but also fostered a sense of community and mutual respect. Even those who had once been silenced by fear found their voices emerging in quiet, yet powerful ways. The nurses, who had long endured both the physical and emotional toll of working in an environment that prized efficiency over empathy, began to speak out, not to confront or criticize, but to share ideas on how to make the hospital a true sanctuary of healing. In weekly meetings, they brainstormed innovative ways to streamline processes without compromising patient care. Their ideas, once dismissed as inconsequential, were now met with open ears and genuine consideration by the new administration. Throughout this transformation, Keanu Reeves continued to play a subtle yet pivotal role. No longer merely the aloof owner with a public persona, he immersed himself in the daily workings of the hospital. He spent mornings walking through the wards, quietly observing the interactions between staff and patients, and evenings engaging in heartfelt conversations with those whose lives had been touched by the changes. His unassuming presence, blending seamlessly with the rest of the hospital community, became a symbol of the newfound ethos, that everyone, from the highest-ranking administrator to the humblest patient, was an integral part of a shared mission to care and to heal. In the quiet hours of one early morning, as Keanu sat in a modest staff lounge, a nurse approached him hesitantly. "Mr. Reeves," she said softly, "I never thought I'd see the day when I could speak my mind without fear." Keanu smiled gently. "That day is here, thanks to all of you," he replied. "It is your courage and compassion that have transformed this hospital." Today, we stand together as a family committed to healing, not just bodies, but hearts and spirits as well. Her eyes glistened with tears of relief and gratitude, a silent acknowledgement of the profound change that had taken root. The hospital's metamorphosis, however, was not without its challenges. The former administration, still reeling from the abrupt dismissal of Dr. Javier and the exposure of systemic corruption, attempted to reassert control. Yet every attempt at returning to the old ways was met with steadfast resistance from the staff and the unwavering resolve of the new leadership. Gradually, what had once been a place of sterile bureaucracy was replaced by an atmosphere of human warmth, where every decision was weighed not just in numbers but in its impact on lives. By the time the next official report came out, it was clear that the hospital's metrics had improved in ways that were both quantifiable and immeasurable. Efficiency was balanced with empathy, patient satisfaction soared, and the once muted voices of those who had suffered in silence now echoed through the halls in stories of healing and hope. It was a revolution that began with a single man's determination and grew into a movement where dignity was restored to every person who walked through those doors. Keanu Reeves' journey that night, a night of painful truths and decisive action, had become the catalyst for a profound transformation. His undercover visit, a test of the system he had created, had exposed the harsh realities lurking behind polished reports and high numbers. And from that exposure emerged a renewed commitment to a singular powerful ideal: that every life is precious, and every individual deserves to be treated with kindness and respect. In the weeks that followed, as the hospital continued to evolve, Keanu would often reflect on that fateful night. Each story of healing, every small gesture of compassion shared between staff and patient, reinforced his belief that real change was possible when courage and empathy prevailed over indifference and apathy. His vision, a hospital where respect, compassion, and care were not mere buzzwords but everyday practices, had not only taken root but was blossoming into something truly extraordinary. As he walked along the hospital corridors on one crisp, clear morning, Keanu took a moment to pause before a window overlooking a small garden. The soft rustling of leaves and the gentle chirping of birds reminded him of the beauty that could emerge even after the darkest of nights. In that reflective moment, he resolved to continue championing the cause of compassion, not only within the walls of his hospital but in every aspect of life. For him, this transformation was far more than a professional triumph. It was a personal redemption, a fulfillment of a promise made to himself long ago when he first experienced the pain of being treated as insignificant. In that hospital, once marred by indifference and neglect, a new era had dawned. And as the light of the new day poured in through its windows, every person inside, whether patient or caregiver, now carried a spark of hope, a belief that dignity and compassion could indeed triumph over cruelty. The legacy of that transformative night, where one man's determination reshaped an entire institution, would live on in every act of kindness, every healing touch, and every grateful smile shared within those hallowed halls. Thus, through unwavering resolve and a commitment to justice, Keanu Reeves transformed a broken system into a beacon of hope. The story of that one fateful night, a night when the suffering of the vulnerable was finally acknowledged, and the powerful were held accountable, remains a testament to the idea that true strength lies not in wealth or fame, but in the capacity to care for one another. And as the hospital continues its journey toward a brighter future, the lessons learned on that long, dark night serve as a reminder that compassion, when nurtured, can change the world one patient, one nurse, and one life at a time.